We live with the quiet fear that death is the end, the great darkness waiting to swallow us whole. Yet this fear blinds us from seeing the simple truth that life and death are not opposites, but part of the same eternal rhythm. Just as waves rise and fall back into the ocean, so too do we return to the source from which we came. To understand death not as an ending but as a transformation is to find peace in living, freedom in dying, and joy in the fleeting miracle of existence. When we speak of death, we often whisper. We treat it like a shadow lurking at the edges of our vision, something to be avoided, postponed, or conquered if possible. Yet it comes for all of us, and in that inevitability lies its power over the human mind. We are conditioned to see it as the ultimate threat, the final defeat, the full stop to the sentence of our existence. But what if this perception is entirely mistaken? What if death is not the opposite of life, but its inseparable companion, the very thing that gives life its shape, its urgency, and its beauty? Imagine reading a story with no ending, the words continuing forever without closure, without resolution. Would it not eventually lose its meaning, its significance, its weight? It is precisely because the story ends that we lean in, that we savor each page, that we allow ourselves to be moved. Death, in that sense, is not the destroyer of life, but its hidden sculptor. Think of music. A single note held forever is not music, it is monotony. Music exists in the rise and fall, in the pauses, in the ending of one sound so another can be born. The silence between notes is as essential as the notes themselves. Without silence, there is no rhythm, no melody, no song. So too with life and death. If life were endless, a perpetual stretch with no boundaries, it would lose the very texture that makes it precious. We treasure moments precisely because we know they will not last. A sunset moves us because the colors fade. A kiss lingers in memory because it cannot be repeated exactly the same way again. The impermanence of life is what makes it sparkle. Without the closing act, the play has no drama. Death is the silence that allows the music of life to exist. The trouble is that our minds, seeking security, recoil from this truth. We build fortresses of belief, hoping to reassure ourselves that something of us will endure untouched. But the deeper wisdom is not found in clinging to survival, it is in embracing transience. When we realize that death and life are not enemies, but two sides of the same coin, the fear loosens its grip. You cannot have light without darkness, up without down, form without emptiness. In exactly the same way, life without death is unimaginable. They exist together, defining each other, giving meaning to one another. Death does not cancel life, it completes it. Consider the natural world. Every autumn, leaves fall and decay, yet in that very process they feed the soil, preparing the way for spring. The death of one form becomes the nourishment of another. In forests, fallen trees decompose and become homes for insects, mushrooms, and countless new forms of life. The cycle is endless and it is beautiful. But when it comes to ourselves, we resist the same truth. We forget that we too are part of nature, subject to the same rhythms, and that our ending is also a transformation. The body returns to the earth, the energy disperses, and nothing is wasted. Death, then, is not annihilation, but continuation in another form. The mind, of course, cries out, but what of me? My memories, my loves, my consciousness, are they all to vanish? And here lies the deepest challenge. We imagine ourselves as isolated entities, little bubbles of awareness floating in a vast, indifferent void. But this sense of separation is an illusion, a trick of language and thought. Who you are is not a fragile self locked inside a body, but the entire process of life expressing itself as this momentary individual. You are the universe briefly looking at itself through human eyes, breathing with human lungs, speaking with a human voice. When the individual form dissolves, the universe does not vanish, the wave falls back into the ocean, but the ocean remains. And was the wave ever truly separate from the ocean? If we can see ourselves not as disconnected beings struggling against death, but as expressions of the whole, then death loses its terror. It becomes not the end, but a return, not an erasure, but a change of form. Think of how we fall asleep each night. The self we cling to fades away, and for hours we vanish into the darkness of unconsciousness. Yet we do not mourn the loss, for in the morning we awaken renewed. Sleep is a small rehearsal for death, a reminder that dissolution is not always tragedy, but often renewal. Death, in its way, is the great rest, the pause that makes room for life to begin again. To understand this is to live differently. When we accept death as the companion of life, we stop running from it. We stop treating each day as a struggle to escape the inevitable, and instead see it as a chance to fully participate in the dance of existence. Awareness of death sharpens awareness of life. The taste of food, the sound of laughter, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. These ordinary moments become extraordinary when you know they will not last. Gratitude blooms in the face of impermanence. You no longer waste energy on illusions of permanence. You embrace the fragile beauty of now. This acceptance also transforms how we see others. Knowing that all are destined to pass away softens the heart, strips away pride and pettiness, and reminds us to cherish the connections we have while we have them. Anger loses its hold when you realize that the person you quarrel with is also fleeting. also fragile, also walking toward the same mystery as you. Compassion deepens, forgiveness becomes easier, love becomes more urgent and real. Death teaches us not to waste the short time we are given on resentment and fear. We are often told to fight against death, to see it as a battle to be won. But what happens if we change the metaphor? What if instead of a battle, we see death as a dance partner, leading us gently, showing us the rhythm of life? Each step, each twirl, each pause is guided by the knowledge that the music will one day stop. And yet, that very fact is what makes us dance with all our heart. The point of the dance was never to reach the last note, but to enjoy each movement along the way. So death, far from being the destroyer of life, is its ultimate affirmation. It reminds us that every breath is precious, every smile fleeting, every moment irreplaceable. It is the backdrop against which the colors of existence stand out in their vivid brilliance. Without it, life would blur into endless sameness. With it, life becomes art, shaped and defined by its boundaries. To embrace death as part of life is to finally be at peace, not just with dying, but with living. And so, when you look upon the reality of death, do not see it as an enemy crouching at the door. See it as the silent companion that has always walked with you, the shadow that gives your light its radiance, the silence that makes your song possible. Death is not the end. It is the other side of life's coin, the necessary partner in the dance of existence. When you truly understand this, the fear dissolves and what remains is freedom, the freedom to live fully, love deeply, and let go gracefully when the time comes. The great anxiety that haunts us when we contemplate death is tied not to the fact of dying itself, but to the sense of self that insists it must survive. We carry within us a deep conviction that there is an inside, a little pilot at the controls of our body and mind, who must be preserved at all costs. It is this self that trembles at the thought of death, because to it, death appears as obliteration. Yet this I, this sense of separateness, is nothing more than a construct of thought, an illusion woven out of memories, names, and habits. The truth is that you are not a small isolated creature that must cling to existence. You are the whole process of existence itself. The fear of death, then, is born of a misunderstanding. It is the puppet forgetting the strings, the wave believing itself apart from the ocean, the dancer thinking it is independent of the dance. Think of the way we draw a boundary around ourselves. We say, "This is my body," as if it was somehow cut off from the world. But every breath you take proves otherwise. You are breathing the air that others exhale, the oxygen produced by trees, the invisible currents of atmosphere moving across continents. You are not a separate container of life. You are in constant exchange with the entire biosphere. The same is true of food, water, warmth, sound, and thought. You are not an island. You are more like a whirlpool in a river, recognizable for a time as a form, but inseparable from the flow itself. A whirlpool cannot be taken out of the river, for its very being is the river. And so, when the whirlpool dissipates, has anything truly been lost? The water remains, the current flows, the whole continues. The form has shifted, that is all. This insight that the self we cling to is an illusion strikes at the root of the fear of death, because if the self is not an isolated fragment, then there is nothing to lose. What we call death is simply the end of a particular pattern of experience, not the end of the reality that gives rise to it. The wave rises, curls, and falls, but the ocean from which it came is untouched. If you have identified yourself only as the wave, then of course you will tremble at its collapse. But if you see that you are the ocean, the collapse is no tragedy at all. Children show us this truth more clearly than anyone. Watch a child lost in play, building, laughing, falling, and starting again. They do not carry the heavy burden of an I that must endure forever. They live as if they are part of the world, not separate from it. And then slowly society teaches them to identify with a name, a story, a body, and a future. This sense of I hardens, and with it comes the fear that this I will vanish. Yet the child's innocence was closer to the truth all along. For in reality, you are not the story you tell yourself, not the mask you wear in society, not even the bundle of thoughts and feelings you identify with daily. You are the whole universe expressing itself as this temporary form, and when that form dissolves, nothing essential is lost. Consider how we experience sleep. Each night, consciousness fades. The self vanishes for hours, yet we do not fear this. We even welcome it, for it restores us. The one who worries, plans, and struggles disappears, and in its place there is deep rest. And in the morning, a new self arises, ready to continue the story. But the self that wakes is not the same as the one that slept. It is a continuation of a pattern, not a permanent entity. If we do not mourn the disappearance of self in sleep, why should we mourn its disappearance in death? Perhaps what frightens us most is not death itself, but the thought of facing the truth that we never had a permanent self to begin with. Philosophers and mystics have long understood that the self is a mirage. The Buddhists call it anatta, no self. Modern neuroscience echoes the same insight, showing that what we call I is a bundle of processes, memories, sensations, perceptions, all constantly shifting. There is no central controller, no homunculus inside pulling the levers. The I is a story told by the brain, useful for navigating the world, but not ultimately real. When the processes cease, the story stops being told, but the universe is not diminished. Life continues, endlessly weaving new forms and new patterns. So if the self is an illusion, what remains? The answer is startling and liberating. What remains is everything. You were never confined to the small circle you thought was me. You are the mountains and rivers, the stars and seasons, the laughter of friends and the tears of strangers. You are the entire network of existence, momentarily condensed into human form. Death does not erase you. It simply dissolves the boundary that made you think you were separate. What you fear to lose was never yours to begin with. What you truly are cannot be lost. This recognition changes how we live. If you no longer cling to a fragile I that must be defended at all costs, you become free to live openly. Fear softens, love deepens, compassion flows naturally, because you see that others are not truly other. They are you in different shapes and stories. To hurt them is to hurt yourself. To love them is to love yourself. The illusion of separation falls away, and with it falls the desperate need to preserve the self at the expense of everything else. It is curious that when people have near-death experiences, many describe a sense of expansion, a release from the narrow boundaries of self, a feeling of unity with all that is. Instead of terror, they speak of peace. Perhaps what they glimpse is this truth, that the self which fears death is only a temporary mask, and when it drops, what remains is vastness. They realize that what dies is not the reality of who they are, but only the illusion they carried. Think of the drop of water falling into the ocean. The drop may tremble, fearing it will cease to exist, but the moment it touches the sea, it realizes that it was never separate. It was always water, always part of the ocean, only for a time appearing as a drop. Death is like this, the dissolving of form into the greater whole. The drop loses its boundaries, but it gains infinity. The tragedy of our fear is that it keeps us from living fully. So much of our energy is spent fortifying the illusion of self, defending it, glorifying it, prolonging it. We build monuments to it, chase wealth for it, cling to possessions and relationships as if they will preserve it. Yet all of this effort is in service of something that never truly existed. To see through the illusion is to be released from this burden. You no longer need to prove yourself, to accumulate endlessly, to conquer others. You can live lightly, joyfully, like a leaf carried on the wind. When you know that the self is not real in the way you once thought, death becomes less frightening. It is no longer the extinction of me, but the continuation of the whole. It is the release of a pattern back into the vastness from which it came. And in that realization lies peace. Instead of dreading death, you begin to trust it as you trust the rhythm of the seasons, the rising and setting of the sun, the ebb and flow of tides. It is not an interruption of life, but its natural unfolding. The irony is that by letting go of the illusion of self, you actually live more fully. You laugh more easily, forgive more readily, and love more deeply, because you no longer need to protect an image of yourself. You are free to be without fear. And when death comes, it will not arrive as an intruder, but as a familiar, as natural as breathing out after breathing in. In the end, the self that fears death is a ghost conjured by thought and language, never real in the first place. When that ghost dissolves, what remains is the living reality that has always been here, the boundless play of existence. To awaken to this is to find liberation in life and serenity in death. For death is not the end of you, because what you truly are has no end, no boundary, no limit. You are not the wave alone, you are the ocean entire, and the ocean never dies. To accept death is to be fully alive in this very moment, for only when we recognize the impermanence of life do we truly awaken to the beauty of what is here and now. The fear of death casts a long shadow over human existence, driving us to grasp at permanence, to cling to memories, to rush toward the future in search of safety. But life is never in the past or the future, it is always and only in this unfolding moment. When you accept death, you cease the endless struggle to escape it, and instead you turn toward the immediacy of being. The awareness of death is like a bell ringing in the distance, reminding you that the only time you ever have is this very breath, this very heartbeat, this fleeting and unrepeatable now. The irony is that most of us live as if we will never die. We postpone joy, delay love, defer our dreams to some imagined future when everything will finally be safe and secure. Yet that future never arrives. We work, worry, and wait, all while the sands of time slip steadily through our fingers. To accept death is to shatter the illusion of endless tomorrows and to see that life is urgent, immediate, precious beyond measure. It teaches us to stop waiting, to stop postponing, and to finally live. You realize that if death could come tomorrow, then the time to love is today. The time to forgive is today. The time to rejoice in the simple miracle of being alive is today. Acceptance of death is not morbid, it is liberating. It removes the heavy burden of pretending that we have control over the length of our days. You do not know when your last breath will come, but you know that it will come. Once you face this truth, every moment becomes radiant. The taste of food becomes sharper, the sound of birdsong more vivid, the touch of a hand more sacred. The awareness of death makes the ordinary extraordinary. It teaches us that nothing can be taken for granted, not even the next breath. And in that awareness, gratitude blooms. Think of the way flowers bloom in spring. They are stunning precisely because they are fleeting. We would not marvel at cherry blossoms if they covered the trees all year long. Their brief appearance makes them all the more precious. Life is like that too. It is precious because it is finite. To accept death is to look at your life as you would a flower, fragile, temporary, yet achingly beautiful. You no longer waste time wishing it would last forever. You simply drink in its fragrance while it is here. You become present, deeply present, because you know the moment is slipping away. Fear of death has a way of narrowing us. We become cautious, anxious, restrained, unwilling to risk or to open ourselves fully. But when you accept death, the opposite occurs. You stop living small, and instead you begin to live boldly, freely, fully. If you know that everything is passing, why not love without hesitation? Why not speak the truth you have hidden? Why not take the leap into the unknown? Death, when accepted, it becomes not a prison but a teacher of courage. It urges you to waste no time in half-living. There is also a profound peace that arises when we accept death. The mind, restless and anxious, spends much of its time trying to secure permanence in a world where none exists. We invest ourselves in possessions, achievements, reputations, as if these things could shield us from mortality. But the effort is exhausting and in the end, futile. Acceptance allows us to lay down this burden. You no longer need to prove yourself immortal through monuments or legacies. You see that the meaning of life is not in its duration, but in its depth. A single moment of genuine presence is worth more than years of distraction. Imagine sitting by the ocean, watching the waves rise and fall. If you resist the falling of the waves, you cannot enjoy the beauty of the ocean. But if you accept that each wave will crest and collapse, you can delight in its brief dance upon the surface. Life is the same. Each moment rises, shines, and falls away. To cling is to suffer, but to accept is to rejoice in the rhythm. Death is not separate from life, but part of its pulse. By embracing death, you finally hear the full music of existence. This acceptance transforms relationships as well. When you know that time is short, you do not waste it on bitterness or trivial conflicts. You begin to see each person you meet as a fragile, fleeting being, walking the same path toward the same end. Compassion blossoms, harsh words soften, unnecessary arguments dissolve, and love becomes the natural way of relating. Death, far from dividing us, becomes the common truth that unites us all. In its light, we realize how foolish it is to waste the miracle of human connection on resentment or pride. Accepting death also means releasing the need for certainty about what happens afterward. The mind craves assurances, heaven, rebirth, continuation of identity, but these are attempts to soothe the fear of ending. True acceptance is not about having answers. It is about being at peace with the mystery. It is about recognizing that life itself is already miraculous, and that whatever follows will be part of the same vast mystery that brought us here in the first place. When you let go of the need to know, you become free to live without fear. You live as a participant in the great dance, not as a spectator demanding explanations. In many ways, to accept death is to finally wake up. It is to realize that this moment is not preparation for something greater later on. It is the very heart of life itself. There is no rehearsal, no second performance. The curtain could fall at any time, and so the only sane response is to pour yourself completely into the scene you are in right now. Laugh deeply, love wholly, feel fully, because the stage is temporary. This awareness does not diminish life, it intensifies it. Every gesture becomes sacred, every breath a gift. If we look honestly, we see that our deepest longing is not for immortality, but for presence, for the ability to live without distraction, without fear, without delay. Death is the reminder that presence is all we ever have. The past is gone, the future is uncertain, but this moment is here. To accept death is to bow to this truth and to finally allow yourself to be alive, not in memory or in imagination, but in reality. So when you walk through your days, let death walk beside you, not as an enemy, but as a friend who whispers, do not waste time. This is it. Live now. When you hear that whisper, you will not postpone joy until tomorrow. You will not hoard love until it is too late. You will embrace life as it is in its raw, fleeting, precious immediacy. And in doing so, you will discover that death, far from robbing you of life, is the very thing that makes life worth living. When we come to the contemplation of death, it is tempting to see it as the final full stop at the end of a sentence, the abrupt extinguishing of all that we know ourselves to be, the terrifying negation of our very existence. Yet the wisdom I have sought to share is that death is not an end, but a transformation, not the collapsing of meaning, but the opening of a doorway into a reality so vast and intimate that our minds cannot fully grasp it. Death, when understood deeply, is not the enemy to be feared, but the great teacher reminding us of what life truly is. Consider for a moment how every single thing you have ever experienced has been defined by its transience. The beauty of a sunset lies in its fading colors, the sweetness of music in its passing notes, the joy of laughter in its brief echo before it dissolves into silence. If every sunset stayed frozen in the sky, if every note were held forever, if every laugh went on without end, the magic would disappear. It is precisely because these things die in their own way that they are meaningful, and the same is true of us. To live is to dance on the rhythm of impermanence, and death is not a rupture in this rhythm, but the continuation of its song. When you pause to think about it, you will notice that life and death are not opposites locked in conflict. They are partners, like inhale and exhale, like the crest and trough of a wave, like light and shadow. Without one, the other has no meaning. Imagine inhaling without ever exhaling, the body would suffocate. Imagine waves rising but never falling, the ocean would become stagnant. Death is not something imposed upon life from the outside. It is woven into the very fabric of existence. You have already died countless little deaths. The child you were at 5 is gone. The teenager you were at 15 has vanished. Even the person you were yesterday has dissolved into memory. We do not mourn these deaths so much because we see them as transformation, as the ongoing evolution of who we are. Why then should the final death, the falling away of the physical form, be seen as any different? It is but another stage in the unfolding of a process that has always been happening. We are constantly dying and being reborn, and what we call death is simply the most dramatic expression of a cycle that has defined us all along. It is the fear of death that shrinks life, that makes us cling, that causes us to resist the flowing of time. But to see death as transformation is to be liberated from fear, for one understands that there is no point in resisting what has always been part of the dance. When we recognize that death is natural, we stop trying to hoard time like a miser clutching at gold coins, and we begin to live fully in the present. The irony is that those who fear death the most often miss life, because they are so caught up in preserving it, extending it, insulating it, that they forget to actually live. But when you accept that you are already flowing with death, that every moment is a tiny death and rebirth, you are set free to be fully alive. You taste your food more richly, you laugh more deeply, you hold the hand of your loved one with a tenderness that knows it cannot last, and precisely because of that, it means everything. Think of the falling leaves in autumn. We do not curse the trees for shedding their leaves, nor do we grieve each leaf as though the tree had been murdered. Instead, we find beauty in the golden colors, in the graceful descent of each leaf back to the earth, in the silence of the forest preparing for winter. Death is like this. It is the season of return, the laying down of the old so that something new may arise. The leaf does not end when it touches the soil. It becomes food for new life, nourishing the tree that bore it, sustaining the earth that cradled it. In this way, death is a contribution, not a theft. Each of us, when we die, returns to the source from which we came, nourishing the great web of existence in ways we cannot fathom. To fear this is to misunderstand the generosity of nature. To trust it is to discover peace. And there is a deeper truth still, one that lies beyond metaphor. You have never experienced non-existence. Before you were born, there was no awareness of absence, no sense of waiting in the void. And when you sleep each night, when consciousness dissolves, you do not experience nothingness as a terror. It simply passes without notice. Consciousness arises again in the morning, and you accept it. So it will be with death. There will be no one there to be afraid of it, no you, to suffer the loss of yourself. In this sense, death is not the end of experience, but the absence of the one who claims ownership of experience. To die is not to vanish into some terrifying abyss, but to surrender the illusion of separateness, to dissolve back into the same vast mystery from which you have always come. You are not a fragile candle snuffed out by the wind. You are the flame itself, and when the candle melts away, the fire returns to the great blaze of being. This is why death need not be dreaded. To dread it is to live a life bound by illusion, shackled by fear. To embrace it is to live with peace, to walk lightly, to see each day as a gift not guaranteed, to love without hesitation because tomorrow is not promised. Death is the reminder that sharpens the edge of life. That calls us to be fully present. It asks us, what will you do with this fleeting moment? Will you waste it on anxieties about tomorrow, or will you taste it, breathe it, cherish it, knowing it will never return? When you see death as transformation, you no longer need to postpone your life. You can live now because you are not waiting for some final security that will never come. There is an immense freedom in this realization. Imagine a man walking across a tightrope. If he is terrified of falling, every step is stiff, every movement filled with dread. But if he realizes that falling is simply another part of the performance, that the net beneath him is not punishment but support, he can walk with grace, even dance upon the rope. Death is the net beneath our lives. It allows us to walk without fear because we know that even when we fall, we are caught by the infinite. This is the peaceful philosophy of life. I have tried to share that death is not the end, but a return, not an erasure, but a homecoming. And when you see it this way, you will not only die well, you will live beautifully. For to live beautifully is to live without resistance, to flow as water flows, to bloom as flowers bloom, to fade as the sun fades, without protest, without grasping. To live beautifully is to know that you are part of something endless, and that your passing is no more tragic than the passing of seasons, no more final than the setting of the sun that will rise again. When death comes, you will not be erased. You will be transformed into the silence, the soil, the air, the stars. You will discover that you were never separate at all, and in that discovery there is peace so profound that it renders fear meaningless. Death is not the end, it is the completion of the circle, the closing of the loop, the return of the wave to the ocean. And when you see it like this, life itself becomes a miracle, radiant in its impermanence, luminous in its fragility, eternal in its endless transformation.